Welcome to Wellness Wednesdays, the kickoff in our series this April. All throughout April, we'll be featuring a different area from the 5 Clifton elements of well-being, which focus on career well-being, social, financial, physical, and community. I'm Cait Burns. I'm the director of the Office of Student Engagement, and we're really excited to kick this off with Reina today. Today, we have with us Reina, an assistant professor in the Department of Management at VCU Business. His research focuses on the intersection of leadership, mindfulness, and emotions in the workplace, and how they aid employees and organizations in successfully adapting to change. So the plan for today is that we'll hear a little bit from him on his research on practicing mindfulness and hear his advice on getting through our current situation. There'll be Q&A spread throughout, so definitely as questions come to mind, type them in the chat, send them to me privately, however you prefer, and we will get going. So let's kick it off with Chris. Thanks so much for being here today with us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Cait. Welcome to everyone. It's good to see many of you, familiar faces and some new faces. For me, today we're going to talk about mindfulness, and you may have various levels of experience with what mindfulness is. Maybe you think it's something that's not so helpful for you and you want to get some more information, or maybe you've been practicing mindfulness broadly defined for many years. This is a broad session for everyone, sort of wherever you are in your journey with mindfulness. And as many of you might know, as a mindfulness researcher, specifically in the realm of leadership in a business school, what I really seek to do with mindfulness is make it applicable to our everyday lives as employees and students and workers. So I might define mindfulness a bit differently than you're used to, but I hope it's an accessible definition and one that helps you put mindfulness to work for your benefit every day as a student, as a worker, as an employee, or just as someone right now who's perhaps struggling with a new structure and a new world that's unfolding, and we're not exactly sure how everything is going to go. So there's a time, certainly right now, with a bit of uncertainty, and I believe mindfulness is really helpful for us to navigate this time. And as Cait said, I really want this to be a session that is most beneficial to all of you. And I'd rather, in my teaching style, as some may know, is really not so much about the lecture approach, but it's really about how do we kind of create this connection together and have an authentic experience. So what I would urge you to do is go ahead and type those questions as you have them in the chat box, and either myself or Cait will bring those questions so we can have a conversation. Again, the most useful session for you is one that you get the questions that you want answered and you make it applicable for you. So I hope that you take my suggestion on that, and we can have a great session. So what is mindfulness? You may have heard many definitions, and it probably entails how you pay attention in a certain way, and it's in tune with the present moment. I think the key there is the present moment. If you think about even what we're experiencing right now as a world, as a business school, as colleagues, instructors, and students, it's really a lot of uncertainty. But if we think about it right now, here together on the Zoom call, connecting, listening, if we're in the moment, right, things are probably pretty okay for us. It doesn't mean they're not going to always be okay, but when we get in trouble is when we think about the future and we think about the past. Therein lies our challenge, right? Because when we go to the future and we go to the past, that's where the anxiety comes up, and we wonder what's going to happen, or we think about something that didn't happen the way we would have liked to, or an event that we had to miss because of the current predicament, right? So in general, mindfulness is just simply being in the present moment. And if we define it very surgically, if you will, present moment awareness without judgment is the most commonly cited definition. But if you're like me, I'm not really sure what that means necessarily when it comes to the workplace. What does it mean to be present moment awareness without judgment? And can I actually do that? I got to get stuff done at work. I have to meet deadlines. I have to work through all my goals. And so I'm not saying that definition is not good, I want to build on that definition and perhaps simplify it for us that need to get work done in this difficult time. And let's just simply say mindfulness is intentional attention. Intentional attention. So paying attention in a certain way without judgment. Okay, so intentional attention. And the neat thing about doing that is that all the excuses that many of us have, and maybe people that we know say, mindfulness isn't for me. That's kind of a weird concept, or maybe meditation's not for me. But the neat thing about defining mindfulness as intentional attention, if we think about our attention as a finite resource, meaning that we don't have an everlasting supply of it, what we pay attention to matters very much, because we can't allocate infinite amounts of attention to everything that demands our attention. We have to be intentional with who and what gets our attention, right? So I think that's the really nice way to define mindfulness in the work context. Again, no one's really talking about it that way, but that's the perspective that I seek to bring and make relevant to work. Because if we think about mindfulness then in our day-to-day, we can bring a feeling and a state of mind of mindfulness to our teaching, to our emails that we write, to the way that we eat our food, to the way that we drink our coffee. And so we can really bring that intentional attention as long as we remember that we're in control of our attention, rather than letting our attention be controlled by what we read, perhaps, or what our mind says we should be worried about. And therein lies the power of mindfulness. It's very empowering to us as individuals when we take control of our own mind and say, it's my control whether I focus in the present, in the future, or in the past. And if I just leave it to myself and to my busy mind will be in the past and my busy mind will be in the future. But the intentionally attentive mind, the one that I can control if I think about it and create structures, that mind can be in the present moment. And some of the anxieties and stressors then of the past and the future fall away. Okay, so we've built on this core. Mindfulness is intentional attention. We have to be careful who and what gets our attention. And in a time that we're currently in right now, there's probably a lot. The news cycle can get our attention. Maybe we're working at home in a new environment and we have kids or we have pets or we have all sorts of new challenges trying to get our attention. And so there's sort of two things I'd like to share with you today. 2 to 3 things are about all we can absorb and put into practice. So the first one is, our brains are really telling us that we got to get a lot of stuff done, and we probably got to get stuff done in a perfect way. I don't know if you are like me, but while everything is so challenging right now, I think I worry too much about how I'm doing things. So if you sort of resonate with that, put your thumbs up. Anyone kind of feel like that right now? So much has changed. Maybe it's faculty moving to online teaching. Maybe it's students to figuring out the technology to be students in an online classroom. Maybe it's reaching colleagues in a completely different way. We're all being challenged with doing things differently. But what we got to focus on, and what I would say our mindful attention needs to be focused on, is the underlying goals, right? If that's faculty members, our goal is to connect authentically with students and share our passion with our subject material. Sometimes we get lost in the technology and sort of the how to do it. And so we may worry too much about doing it exactly right or perfectly or looking good. And we all want to look good, so that's not a problem. But I think in this current time, what we can do is be kinder to ourselves and be more intentionally attentive to what matters, and that's connection. And so that allows us to let go of some of the anxiety associated with doing things perfectly. So a more mindful approach right now would be, can you help your mind think of, instead of doing things perfectly, think about getting things done? As everything changes, or it feels like so much is changing right now, what our brain and mind and body need is to get stuff done, check it off the list, and have some small wins. Stephen Covey says that you got to celebrate your small wins or small victories. So give yourself those victories and celebrate them. And I think in the current time, we're sort of working against that because we're a little bit too focused on perfection. Okay, so that's one point. And then I promise I'll stop talking because I'd love to get to your questions for the last 15 minutes or so. The second point is just remembering sort of what those, and it's related to the first, is remembering what those values are that you have. So what motivates you? What are your long-term goals? What have you been working on? Is that, what are the things that get you excited and you value in your life? Maybe it's physical fitness. Maybe it's achieving a degree. Maybe it's bettering yourself through learning new things. Maybe it's being adventurous. Whatever those big ideas are that you have, this goes back to Stephen Covey's work also on focusing on the big things first, right? You got to find what those things are that matter most to you, and then just find a new structure to reinforce that. So again, this goes with that first point. Figure out what matters most, and then just get it done, but don't worry about getting it done perfectly. And oftentimes we're worried about the little things more than we are those big things that are our underlying value system. So for a simple example, if you value physical fitness and sort of staying mentally and physically sharp, as many of us do, given that gyms are closed and we have to do things differently right now, we just got to create a structure around making that happen. And I have some links that I'll throw in the chat box at the end that you can access. But recreational sports at VCU is doing all virtual programming. You could sign up for a 90-day free trial of Peloton, which I did yesterday, and they do streaming classes that I mirrored from my iPhone to my TV, and I did a workout in the living room. Again, I had to let go of doing it perfectly. That's not how I would prefer to work out, but that's part of the reality, and it continues to create that value that I care about, which is staying sort of mentally and physically in shape, or sort of on that kind of clear-minded focus that doing something physical allows me to do. So got to let go of the perfection. We got to remember what we value most. And when we value and we think about what we value most, we also realize that, hey, those things aren't gone. I just have to do them in a different way, which makes a lot of hope for us. It reminds us that this is going to be over at some point. Maybe life will change in some ways, right? But at that point, the new normal is just what we know as normal. And so I think as a final thing I would like to add is just remembering at this time that a lot has changed on how we do stuff, perhaps. But if we focus, we remember, and we are attentive, those things that we value most haven't changed if we think about them deeply. Okay, so I want to do 15 minutes of content. I'm at 15 minutes, and I would love to have the rest of the time, have your questions and just see what's on your mind. If you just give me a moment to read and then think for a second, I'll be jumping in shortly.
Yeah, and I can also help with that. So one of the questions that came in, you're talking about these unusual times and just how we're in this new normal. I know a lot of graduating seniors are facing a different kind of year end. So we have someone who mentioned really grieving not being able to have that graduation ceremony, the ring ceremony, all of the ritual that comes with that and the big significance. Do you have any advice as far as how she can use mindfulness and others can use mindfulness as working through the grief process?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I think I've heard that in the conversations I've had with my students. I teach Management 319. A lot of students that are seniors in the class. We have a lot of athletes whose senior year in the NCAA world got cut short as well. So I think we're all grieving to some extent, what we had looked forward to. And I think what mindfulness teaches us is that we need to feel that. We need to recognize that is a disappointment. And so, I think it's important that we don't pretend that we don't need to feel that. So I think what the students are feeling, what we're feeling as faculty, is really important to acknowledge and let it be. To some extent, it's being in that emotion. It's not allowing us to sort of get derailed such that when we're done feeling that emotion, that we're not able to do our work. So I think there's a balance there, right? So it's if we set our goal for the day to achieve writing this paper, or finishing this manuscript, or prepping for whatever lecture that we're about to give tomorrow, right? So get those small wins in, get those check marks done, but also what I would say is schedule some unscheduled time. If that sounds strange, then let's take that together here. So schedule some unscheduled time. Put some time in your calendar that is just time for you. And maybe grieving a little bit and working through that emotion that you're feeling is a healthy way for you to work through that. So here the idea is, remember, the idea with mindfulness is being more intentional with our attention. It's not that we can't or shouldn't feel some of those negative, sadder emotions that we're feeling. It's just giving them the space to feel them and own that, rather than having them creep into all of the other things that we're doing. So it's sort of, if you think of a pie, a delicious pie of your choice, right? There's a piece of that pie that can be devoted to getting your task done. There's a piece of that pie that should be for working through emotions and feeling things. And then there's another piece of the pie that can be for the next task. The problem is we can't divvy that pie up such small pieces that we're constantly worried about certain things, because then the pie's gone, right? So it's being more intentional with what we're doing when we're doing it, and also being kind to ourselves in the process. So that's how I would answer that. It's not a perfect answer. I think a lot of the answers I may give are aspirational for us to work on, and that's important. Me or anyone who practices mindfulness, right? We don't have this all figured out. It's all a journey. It's all a process. And as we seek to become more intentional with our attention, I think we can control over time the extent to which sort of those really negative feelings become a lens through which we see the world. We still acknowledge and feel them, but they don't sort of bring us down as much in the full spectrum of our living as they would previously. Yeah,
Thanks.
good question.
Yeah.
Sure.
So going along with this concept of intentional attention, we have our world. So we have our internal world that we can really control as far as our productivity, what we choose to spend our time on, our to-do list. And then there's this whole external world and an influx of information coming in as far as the news, all of the different buzz that's going around. Can you talk a little bit about that middle ground and finding out how do we, when news is overwhelming, there's this choice. We could avoid all of it coming in, or we can filter the information. So we have some questions specifically about what are your recommendations on consuming the news? And as far as finding that middle ground, how can we think of approaching that so that we have some control over what we're absorbing?
Yeah, to go back to that pie example, I mean, I think a piece of the pie should be our consumption of news and staying informed, right? I think we should structure that time. And I think we should be intentional with that time and not let it spill over to all other aspects, right? So keep that attentional pie piece very intentional around the news. And so that means creating a structure on your computer, on your laptop, on your world, right? Maybe it's not having the news on all the time. Maybe it's not allowing, your news channel of choice to, pop up and give you a notification on your smart device, because what that does is that steals away the intentional attention that we're committing to a different pie piece, and it steals it right back into the pie piece it doesn't probably deserve or need our attention at that moment. And so that makes us less intentional with our attention. So a middle ground answer, yes, I believe we need to stay informed. We need to figure out, what's going on, and we need to connect with that sort of outside world. But just like emails can completely derail your day, and they can be a full-time job in itself if you just watch the inbox and see an email come in and then knock out the email and send it off. It may feel good, right? But then those longer term projects, those things you value more, like Maybe it's fitness, or maybe it's learning a new skill, or maybe it's finishing that paper that you need for your midterm. Whatever it is, those sort of goals that are just like very quick check marks often derail us from the larger, bigger things we should be working on. So I would say build in the time, but be intentional with it and create the structures where you aren't as tempted. That may mean closing your email. I guarantee you, well, for some of us on the call, maybe people need to be in contact given our positions, at all times. So if that's your case, certainly don't close your email. But for many of us, probably intentionally checking email once an hour would probably be fine. And as we sort of gain confidence with that, we could probably move to every 2 hours and still be okay, and still be way more intentional with our attention that we can focus on other things. So it's keeping everything in their little organized box, I guess, is what I would say to that question. And I just happened to notice a question on the side there about humor. I think that is really important right now. I think as leaders, as people that look up to, as we are people that people look up to, whether that's sort of in leadership positions or instructors, or maybe it's just well-informed students who are sort of leading our family and helping folks make sense of what's going on. We're all leaders because we're all exhibiting acts of influence every day in all things that we do. That's how I define leadership. So we're all leading. I think humor is a way to connect with people, and that's what we need. We really need connection in a time where we can't physically be together. As you connect with people and as you can be humorous, and I think the larger point behind humor is maybe vulnerability. And I think that's even more important. We can admit that we don't know all the answers right now. And this is challenging. The world is going through this process and grieving process. And our frontline workers are being pushed in a way, physically and emotionally and physiologically, in ways that we haven't seen. And so that sense of shared vulnerability in a time like this, whether that's through humor or whether it's through just deep conversation, I think that goes really far in creating, relationships that last, that will last even through this challenging time.
Great, thanks. So I have another one here, and it relates to connection and social wellness and really our sense of community. Do you have any advice or thoughts on how we can use mindfulness as a way to encourage others during this time?
So the idea, just to make sure I understand, I think, is that we can be mindful, although others around us may be less mindful. So how do we sort of impart that to them without it being awkward? Or is that the idea, of sort of sharing that mindfulness?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard way to answer the question, but it's a really neat way to think about it. Is sort of that quote that says, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Is it really does start with us. So when we practice it, when we show up differently with a little bit of that anxiety diminished, and we can continue to be more intentional with our attention, people notice, right? So I think on a very basic level, the mindfulness, and this is where a lot of my research is going, and I'm really seeking to figure out how do we study this, because I know from my own experience that it happens, right? I guess it's a bad example given right now, but I was going to say, diseases are infectious. Probably not the right example at the moment, but we know how sort of disease spreads, right? Biologically, physiologically. We're learning and seeing through science and the practice of management, like how does leadership and how do people's emotions spread? There's a contagion process there as well. And one thing I'm interested in studying is that mindfulness contagion. How do we share that sort of sense of being in that present moment with others and bring them in so that they can also experience that? And so, a longer ongoing question is exactly how that works. My instinct and gut would say at the moment, based on research and experience, is that we just show up differently and people see it. In fact, I do a lot of coaching and training work. And when you ask people what the best leaders do, they always say some variation of, the best leaders make me feel valued, right? And if you think about why and what leaders do to make people feel valued, it's being with them, it's understanding them, it's caring for them, it's asking questions, it's not being distracted around them. So to me, the best leaders are those who make people feel valued because they're present, because they're mindful, because they exist in that relationship with them and they value that relationship. So I think, getting to the root of how do we spread mindfulness, we do it ourselves. And that fundamentally, I believe, transforms that dyadic relationship between people or between teams, because people know that and they feel it. Yeah, that's a good question.
Great. So we have time for about one or two more questions. If anyone has some thoughts circling around. Another one came in, thinking about routine. So as we have our to-do list and we approach doing our work and getting it done, not perfectly, but just trying to get through our days and give ourselves some grace. What importance can routine or ritual have in that, or what impact could it have?
So there's a tension there, right, with putting routine and structure in place to bring about mindfulness, but not being too ritualistic about it, right? I think there needs to be that interplay of doing things a bit differently. So on one hand, I would say absolutely build in a structure around mindfulness. Think about what you do every day, that you can use that as a pause to reflect on your mental state. So a couple of ones that I was thinking about, what's one thing that we're supposed to be doing constantly in our new environment? Hand washing, right? So as you wash your hands, like, how can you wash your hands differently? Can you actually just sort of feel the sensation of washing your hands and smell the soap if the soap is fragranted or has fragrance? So it doesn't mean you have to do things completely differently. It's just a small tweak on what you already do. Wash your hands differently. That 20 seconds already is something different. But when you focus on the hand washing, you get outside of that mental busy head stuff that you're probably doing, which is stressing you out. So use that hand washing as a reset moment. And by the way, even before this outbreak, right, I did a lot of speaking and coaching with doctors at MCV and nurses. And we often say, use stuff you got to do every day as you move between patients that need your best and your full and, intentional attention. Wash your hands and quite literally sort of wash whatever happened in that one patient room out of your mind and go to the next activity. Reset. So I think, as we all now wash our hands much more often, use that as a reset. Maybe it's looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing, oh my gosh, my hair is so long, I haven't had a haircut in 4 weeks, right? That's going to start being a lot of our realities. Can that just simple fact, every time it happens, be a reminder that I can laugh a little bit and sort of chuckle at that, and I can let my shoulders down, and I can take a couple of deep breaths, and I can bring myself to that present moment, because that moment that we're experiencing is probably, for the most part, okay. And that gives us that power over the power or the future and the past that keeps kind of drawing us in.
Thanks. So we are up on our time. There was one that came in that I think could be a great, just final few words or thoughts. Why is empathy so important right now?
Well, empathy and compassion sort of come together. And this idea, the root of the word compassion really means to suffer with or suffer together. And if we think about the world right now and our country and sort of all that we're going through, there really is that sense of suffering a bit together. And I think what it's brought about, even in my own neighborhood, close to campus here, I've met neighbors, I've talked to people differently, at 6 feet away, but it's a sense of community that is somehow emerging. And I think we have to cultivate that now. And while we typically were so busy, we didn't maybe spend the time getting to know people or have a reason to talk to people, as we are collectively focused on ensuring that the spread is on a waning trajectory. That common goal sort of reinforces to us that shared experience, and ultimately empathy and compassion rely on that shared experience, because if I understand what you're going through, right, I can say and do things differently to help you. And that's sort of that root of that compassionate relationship. So it is indeed very important right now. And I would add sort of that empathy and compassion for self is really important. And that means, when you're less productive, because we probably all are a little bit less productive, we have a lot going on. Can we help ourselves by, instead of getting 5 things done a day, can we focus on 2? And can we get those 2 things done? And can we continually bring our attention back and focus those, pie pieces of attention and be better at maintaining that present moment orientation and not getting dragged around by those other things that get in our way. And then maybe as we adjust to the new normal and as we continue to build that mindfulness muscle, maybe it's 3 things we can get done in a day. But for now, it's being kind with ourselves, setting goals, meeting those goals, and meeting those goals without perfection.
Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your thoughts on intentional attention and mindful intention, and how we can really chip away at our days, take control of our to-do lists, and also connect with others, be vulnerable, have empathy for each other to get through this. So Chris mentioned that he will be putting some links in the chat. Feel free to hop off. We'll send those links out with you and share them. If you have any other final questions or parting questions, feel free to add them to the chat and we will see about addressing them. For all of April, the Office of Student Engagement will be continuing this series with Mentoring Mondays at 1 p.m. and Wellness Wednesdays at 12. So we look forward to seeing you again. Hope you got something out of this quick session. I know I did. And so have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon.
A quick plug, I'm going to throw it into the chat box, but pretty neat program right now. So VCU's Recreational Sports is doing a free mindfulness-based stress reduction course for 4 weeks. It was previously offered at like $300 or something, but it's now for free. And so it's 7 to 9 p.m. the next 4 Mondays. That'll be the first link that I send you. Great opportunity. It's through Zoom. They record and give you audio meditations and mindful moments for you to work on, and some worksheet, kind of reflection questions. And then they meet 7 to 9 p.m. for the next 4 Mondays. I'm going to do it. It's always nice to, have someone lead me instead of be the teacher all the time. So I may do it. I encourage you to do that as well. And then I'm going to give you a couple other links and things to check out. So there's lots of resources out there. Good luck on the mindful journeys. And just remember, one moment, one day at a time.